This is the new 2023 BMW XM, and it's, well, a lot of things. Fast, for one. It has 650 horsepower. It's also expensive, with a starting price of around $160,000. And it's controversial. The styling has been, well, criticized, questioned, talked about ever since BMW first showed it off. Today, I'm going to review the new BMW XM and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And you should, because we've had some great sales lately, including this Mercedes C60 AMG with the P30 development package, sold for $45,000. This wonderful new Toyota Supra, heavily modified, sold for just under $60,000, and this Porsche Boxster T sold for $57,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. With daily auctions, great selection, and free listings, check it out at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features, the new BMW XM. There are many, but let's start with a little overview of exactly what this vehicle is. This is a brand new SUV crossover from BMW, not related to other models, but it's not quite like them coming out with a new X5 or a new X6 or a new X7. This is the XM, with M standing for Motorsport, BMW's high-performance division, and this is just a performance SUV. There's no standard model version of it, no base model with less power, performance only from the XM, meant to rival the Lamborghini Urus, the Audi RS Q8, the Porsche Cayenne Turbo. Now BMW has a purpose-built performance SUV to take on those cars. So, what's it got? Under the hood, you have a twin-turbo V8, which is mated to a plug-in hybrid system for a total of 644 horsepower, which is a pretty big number. The XM also has 590 pound-feet of torque, which is also a strong number, and all these come standard with all-wheel drive and an 8-speed automatic transmission. And since it's a plug-in hybrid, it can travel in electric-only mode for a little while. BMW says around 30 miles of pure electric range. To me, though, there's a drawback of the XM that comes when you look at its numbers on paper. Okay, 644 horsepower, huge figure. 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds, pretty good, but the price tag is massive. This starts around $160,000. By comparison, BMW's own X5M has 600 horsepower, or about 620 if you get the competition model. It'll do 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds, and it starts at $125,000. So the X5M is faster and cheaper. But BMW would argue, well, the X5M is just a performance version of a regular mid-size crossover. This is a purpose-built luxury SUV. Sort of like how the Lamborghini Urus is just a kind of a better version of the Audi RS Q8. This thing is purpose-built for performance. But on paper, those numbers are a little questionable. And since we're talking Urus, let's do that comparison. The Lamborghini Urus has more power than the XM. I think it's at like 660 horses to this 645, but the Urus starts around $235,000, so a lot more money than this. Now, you can get an Audi RS Q8 for less money than this, but it also has less power. However, all of the performance SUVs I've named are faster than the XM. The RS Q8, the Urus, the X5M, they're all faster. So how is that possible? The answer is, this thing is incredibly heavy. BMW says it weighs just under 6,100 pounds, which is a massive figure. For comparison, an Urus is just under 5,000 pounds. So this is 1,200 pounds heavier than a Lamborghini Urus. It's also like 900 pounds heavier than an RS Q8. It is a big, heavy vehicle, which dulls some of the performance even with all this power. Fortunately, BMW will soon be offering an even more powerful version. It will be called the XM Label Red, and apparently it's the first in a series of label something models that BMW is going to come out with. That version will have 735 horsepower, and that'll probably make it faster than basically all of its rivals. The drawback, again, will be price tag. The Label Red will apparently start just under $190,000. Massive money, but it seems like it will have massive performance. But anyway, next up, on to the many quirks and features, and I want to start with the styling, which has been tremendously controversial. My own opinion is, bracing myself, I actually don't hate it all that much. To be clear, I think it looks weird. It's totally different, totally out there, but in my mind, almost sort of in a good way, especially because we live in a world where the Audi Q7 is redesigned with a look that basically is the same as the last one. Same deal with the Porsche Cayenne, just so evolutionary and boring. The new Range Rover looks almost just like the last Range Rover. Nobody's taking risks anymore. So BMW decided to take some risks. I like the angles. I think it's kind of cool and interesting. Definitely weird, but in my mind, that's almost a good thing. And I personally think it looks a lot better than the Lamborghini Urus, which I still feel is ugly. The design of that car has never grown on me. The weird beak nose at front that's way too long. I think this looks better than that. But regardless of how you feel about the design, there are definitely some odd quirks sprinkled throughout, like this stripe going down the side of the car. It starts at the rear window line, which is fine, but then it sort of goes down the doors, almost like the window trim is 6 inches lower than it should be. It's a very odd stripe, and it says XM at the very front part on the front fenders. Up front, you have a massive grille, as is recent BMW tradition, although it isn't quite as massive as I was expecting it to be. The kidney grille part is fairly normal, although the entire front end is a little bit much. The weirdest thing up front is not the grille, but in fact the headlights. You look at them and they look like these tiny little thin strip headlights, but in fact those are the front turn signals. The headlights themselves are here. They're hidden almost into the grille trim, and you would never know that they're there. Only the turn signals stand out, which is odd. And when they're on, the turn signals are especially odd because they sort of gradually turn on and off rather than blinking like most normal turn signals. It's a little bit unorthodox, but everybody seems to be playing with lighting these days, and there's an example of that. The rear turn signals are actually even more unusual. They also gradually turn on and off, but have this kind of strange urgency to them, and it's just a little bit weird the way that they kind of turn on, almost like an emergency vehicle light. It's odd, but again, weird lighting touches are in these days, and that's a good example. Plus, the rear turn signals are nowhere near the most unusual thing in back. Probably the most unusual touch is that there's no central BMW logo on the tailgate like there is on every other BMW. You don't have that here. Instead, you have XM as the only thing printed back there, sort of in the middle off to one side, kind of odd. At first glance, you would think there's no BMW badging back here at all, but in fact, there are little BMW logos in the corners of the rear window. The upper corners have these strange BMW logos here, kind of matching what BMW did years ago with the M1 supercar that also had two BMW logos at the upper corners of its rear end. Now, on the XM, you have these odd window-mounted badges. And there's still more weird stuff in back, specifically the exhaust, which you can see quad exhaust, so two pipes on each side, but they're stacked on top of each other vertically, which is definitely a strange way to do it. Another odd and unorthodox exterior styling design decision in the XM. Also unusual with the XM is the key, which you can see here. It looks different from other BMW keys, and it's kind of strangely laid out. You have the M colors sort of sneaking their way through the middle, and then the BMW logo on the top locks the doors, or you can press it 3 times to remote start the car. Instead of a traditional lock button, you have the BMW logo, which is actually kind of cool. But next we move inside the XM, where actually it's surprisingly normal in here. Despite the unusual market position and styling of this car, the interior is fairly standard, although there are a couple of strange touches, like the sound it makes when you press the start button. And and the headliner, which you can see has lights integrated into it, kind of going down the side of the car on the ceiling, although that's not the most unusual thing about the headliner. Take a look at the design, which has a bunch of angles and triangles and shapes all integrated into the headliner. Very unusual, very unorthodox, although it does match the exterior door handles. As you can see here, they also have kind of some of these weird angles and shapes. I guess that's to match the overall weird angles and shapes design of this car. But the big news in the XM interior is the arrival of a brand new infotainment system. Actually not entirely brand new. It's trickled into a few other just released BMW models, but here it is in the XM. You have this giant curved screen on the top of the dashboard on the driver's side through the center. Now, the right portion of this screen in the middle of the dashboard is obviously the infotainment system, and I must say it's great, although there are a few drawbacks. The great parts first, it's tremendously responsive, so you move, tap, swipe, touch, pinch, and it does all of that stuff very quickly, just like you'd expect from a smartphone or a very well-designed infotainment system. I also love the home screen, which shows you exactly what you want to see, and if you want to see more, just swipe over for more details from the home screen. Instead of having to go deep into menus to find stuff, the home screen has a lot of stuff in sort of a line you can just swipe over, which is a neat idea. And I also like how generally intuitive this system is. The controls and commands make a lot of sense, and it's quite easy to use. And I like the fact that you have secondary backup controls in the center console. So if you don't feel it's safe enough to reach over to the screen while you're driving, you can operate the screen with these controls in the center, and gives you a backup for whichever one is more comfortable for you. However, there are a few drawbacks to this screen, and the biggest one is undoubtedly the climate control situation. All of the climate controls pretty much have been integrated into the screen, and when you tap climate menu, it pulls up this giant array of climate controls, all of which look the same and are arranged in sort of a haphazard manner. If you just want to turn on your heated steering wheel, you got to go into climate menu and then find the one that corresponds to the heated steering wheel. Most other automakers have like a diagram of the interior and you just tap what you want, but here you have to choose between all these sort of similar looking switches, and it's not really the best way to lay it out. I also don't love the fact that the icons over on the left side of the home screen, you have navigation, music, your phone, those disappear when you actually go into the screen. So if you go into navigation, well, you've just lost your navigation icons over on the left side, and you have to go back to the home screen if you want to transition to music. Not exactly the best layout. Those left icons should probably stay put regardless of what screen you're in. But generally speaking, I really like this infotainment system. And it complements a new BMW gauge cluster, which is also excellent. The center part is configurable and in a great way. You can use it to pull up all sorts of different information, from like vehicle status to driver assist technology to the music you're listening to or a navigation map. You also have a heads-up display mounted in your line of sight projecting onto the windshield ahead of you, which gives you even more auxiliary information, which is nice. Although I'm always a little disappointed in BMW gauge cluster screens that you can't configure them a little bit more. A full screen map would be nice, or it'd be cool to see the map and the music. A lot of other automakers let you do that, but not BMW. However, the gauge cluster screen is configurable when you change drive modes. You can see right now it's in the standard mode, and it already looks kind of sporty with some angles and the M colors, but go into sport mode and you can see the change that it makes. Now it's heavily prioritizing performance stuff like the gear you're in and your RPMs to make you feel sportier in sport mode. And speaking of sport mode, this being an M performance SUV, it has the little M buttons on the steering wheel, so M1 and M2. These are configurable drive mode buttons, and it's a cool idea. You can configure them, and then your ideal drive modes are right at your fingertips, literally. You don't have to go into some menu and find your individual drive mode that you chose. You can just tap these little thumb buttons, and you're in the drive mode you want, and you can go. Now, beyond the little M drive mode buttons, this interior does have some other M touches since this is an M car. The seatbelts have the M colors stitched into them, which I always find to be cool. And same deal on the steering wheel, little M stitching on the inside of the steering wheel rim like other M cars have. You also have an enormous amount of carbon fiber in this interior. You can see on the dashboard and in the center console, which further underscores its sporty nature. And speaking of the interior, I want to point out out, it's pretty nice. BMW has had some good stages and some bad stages with their interior quality, but we're in a good one right now. There's a lot of good materials in here. Everything looks nice. It's well laid out. A lot of other luxury brands are making high quality interiors right now, and BMW has risen to the occasion, and this car's interior is fitting with its price point. And next we move on to the back seat, where there are a few interesting things to note back here, starting with the design. Over on the door panels, you have this like plunging line that goes all the way down the side and actually matches up with the trim on the side of the car behind the back seat. It gives it kind of an unusual look, but the really unusual look back here comes when you look up and see the headliner, and from the back you can really see all of the strange angles and lines and elevation. It is very unusual, this headliner. I think it's actually pretty cool, and it certainly gives you an interesting vibe in the back seat. But moving on to the rest of the back seat, there's a lot to like back here. The biggest thing is just how much space there is in the back seat. It's absolutely massive. I have tons of space for headroom, knee room, legroom. It's huge back here, even for tall adults like me. This is one advantage the XM has over the X5 for sure. A lot more space in back compared to that car, which is definitely smaller. And the seats are so supple, soft leather, some of the softest I've seen in any modern car. Between that and the space, it feels very comfortable and luxurious back here. Truthfully, one of the nicest back seats I've been in any recent vehicle. And that's further helped by all the amenities. You can see a climate control zone for the back seats and heated rear seats, which is obviously nice to have, and a couple of charge ports lower down to charge your devices back here. A lot of good stuff in this back seat, which does help to justify the high curb weight of this vehicle a little bit. There's just more car and more luxury for rear seat passengers. And finally, we move on to the cargo area in the XM, which has a couple of interesting items worth pointing out, the most unusual of which is this bag back here that looks like an old school doctor bag from back when doctors used to make house calls, except it has the gold XM label on the side, and it's tethered to a hook in the cargo area with some BMW M rope. So this is definitely a little bit unusual. The only thing in this bag is the charging cables. There's nothing strange in it, but the floor of the cargo area in the XM doesn't lift up like it does in so many other cars. That's where a lot of cars keep the charging cables, but not here. So instead, you have the XM doctor badge. Now, the other quirky thing in this cargo area is there's no lip in the back of the cargo area floor. And that means if you're parked on a hill and you load in a bowling ball, it will roll all the way out and then roll down the street, or any other round item. Obviously, that's kind of ridiculous, but most cars have like a little inch lip to make sure nothing rolls out, but that's not the case here. It's just flat, which is kind of odd. The other interesting thing worth pointing out in this cargo area is there's no way to release and fold down the back seats from the cargo area. A lot of other SUVs at this price point, you can push a button and the back seats automatically fold down, or at least pull on a latch and they fold down, but not here. You got to go to the seats manually, fold them down, which is a surprise at this dollar level. But I suspect most people who buy this car probably wouldn't use that feature. If you want seats and practicality, you're going to get an X5 or an X7. This is all about the performance. So let's go drive it. All right, driving the XM. The performance BMW SUV that doesn't quite outperform the other performance BMW SUVs, but we'll move on. Okay, first thought, I'm gonna floor it here. Okay, it's quick, but it's not that quick. BMW says 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds. Truthfully, it'll probably be a little faster than that. I suspect when the magazines get a hold of it, they'll be able to do like 3.7, 3.8, 0 to 60, which you or I will likely not be able to do since they do it on prep surfaces and they know what they're doing, but it gives you a good comparison point with other BMW models like the X5M, which does it in 3.8 also, using the same methodology. But with that in mind, I just don't think 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds is tremendously fast. It's as fast as a Carrera GT or an Enzo, basically. But in today's world, and for $160,000, you know, Model X Plaid, you just mash the throttle and does 0 to 60 in like 2.2. So 3.8 for a car that costs like 60 grand more. So the acceleration is, I would call it fine. It's good enough, it's fine. I think where BMW really went went wrong with this car is they made it a plug-in hybrid. The Urus and all those cars are not plug-in hybrids, and as a result, they don't have to deal with the significant weight that this car is dealing with. Then that hurts this car in a couple of different ways. The most obvious is acceleration. They're gonna have to come out with this 735 horsepower label red model in order to counteract the massive weight of this car, but it's also steering and handling. This is a big and heavy car. I do not like how the Urus looks, and I'm not a big fan of the fact that all of those cars basically share the same, well, everything. The Urus, the Cayenne Turbo, the RS6, I mean, it's just a non-SUV version, essentially. The RS Q8, but they're fast, they're fun, and unlike this car, they're not ludicrously heavy. What those cars have going for them is actually some pretty precise steering and handling, which is not something I'm gonna say about this. Where I think this car is gonna find success is not necessarily people who really care that much about the steering and handling capabilities, or even really about the acceleration, honestly. I think what's gonna hit people about this car, what they're gonna like, is it looks totally unlike everything else. So you or I look at it on paper and we say the X5M just seems like a better value, why wouldn't you get that? But someone who really wants to flex in Miami or in Beverly Hills or wherever, they're gonna look at an X5M and say, people think it's a regular X5. I want something more obviously cool. And this is going to be that. And on paper, it's close to the Urus in terms of performance and all these other cars, and so it fits into that mold. It is special, it is different, and it looks special and different, and I think that's really what they're going for there. If you're a value shopper, you're not necessarily going to consider this car at all. It just doesn't make any sense, especially compared to other similar vehicles. But if you just want something cool and totally unlike other BMWs, the X5M won't do, and that's where this car steps in. However, from a pure driving perspective, it is merely fine. The acceleration is good, but not class leading. The steering and handling is fine, but the weight also makes that not class leading. It's good, it does well, it's cool, the tech is nice, but this car is not like knock your face on fire kind of amazing. I'm excited to drive the label red and really feel like what I think a true crazy version of this car is going to be, sort of the Hellcat model, because right now, to be honest, I'm a little underwhelmed, particularly at this price point. But if what I'm saying is true, that the people who buy these are going to be the flexers, you know, this styling will stand out. These designs will stand out, these XMs. And that is something people are going to want. And then you have pretty good power, and you're not really comparing these 0 to 60 times. You just got something fast, and so does somebody with an RS, but yours is cool too, and that's kind of what people are looking for. Again, it's fine, but it's just fine, and I think that better could exist. And so that's the new 2023 BMW XM. This is an impressive vehicle with some very impressive technology and equipment and performance, although it has a similarly impressive price tag to match. Like it or not, this is BMW's in-your-face response to the Lamborghini Uruses of the world. And now it's time to give the new XM a DOUGSCORE. And the DOUGSCORE is here, 67 out of 100, which places the XM in the lower half of the very competitive performance luxury SUV segment. Truthfully, the XM has a lot of potential, but its drawbacks are too glaring for it to rise to the top. It's not quite fast enough, which would be fine, except it's too expensive to be that slow, and frankly, it's so heavy it doesn't handle especially well either. And then there's the styling. I understand that the BMW X5 competition isn't as special as the XM based on a regular model, but it's a far better value, as are a lot of rivals like the Audi RS Q8 and the Tesla Model X Plaid. And I think the XM will face stiff competition from some very appealing vehicles that are faster, cheaper, better looking, or in many cases, all three.